Halper Show. Thanks so much for listening. On this week, we have a great episode. We interviewed Ben Jealous, former head of the NAACP, former Bernie Sanders surrogate, who wound up then endorsing Hillary Clinton, much like Bernie Sanders did. He's also on the board of directors of Our Revolution, progressive political organization that is the inheritor of Senator Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign. Now, just to explain, this interview we are now releasing, we interviewed him 6 p.m. on November 8th. That is the night of the elections. And what you're going to see is Ben Jealous predict why Donald Trump won. And it's interesting because, honestly, I have to say that when Gabe Pacheco, my co-host, and I interviewed Ben Jealous, I really expected it to be a kind of get out to vote against Trump. And I almost didn't even ask him until the very end any predictions about tonight. That's where we start the interview, then we go back in time, but you'll see why I moved that earlier. It's a pretty exciting part of it. But it is kind of funny that we almost didn't talk about this because I thought that Hillary Clinton was going to win, and I thought the question that we had to grapple with was how we were going to hold her feet to the fire. Okay, please check out The Katie Halper Show on Patreon. That's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Support our show. If you do, you'll get extra bonus goodies that are coming down the pike so soon are interviews with Carl Bayer, interviews with Emmett Renson, interview with Leslie Lee, the creator of Bernie Made Me White, Eric Andiola, Bernie Sanders' former Latina press secretary, an interview we did with Freddie DeBoer, Juan Mejia, and Amber Ali Frost, an interview we did with Liza Featherstone and Doug Henwood. Hi, guys. We are talking with Ben Jealous. We're so happy. Guys, we're so happy. We've been trying to do this for a while.
No, you've been awesome, Katie.
Oh.
And I really, you're so charming. I just wanted to wait till I could do it in person.
Thank you. We'll pretend that's what happened. So, okay, I'm going to do a proper intro. Not only was he the president of the NAACP, but the youngest president.
At 35.
At 35. Well, we're not going to say the years because a lady never tells, and neither does a gentleman. So it could have been last year. Yeah. And you're now a professor at Princeton in the Woodrow Wilson School. Nice. Yes. You were a Bernie surrogate. Yep. And you are on the board of Our Revolution.
I am.
And you're with KPOR Capital. And Ben is a Rhodes Scholar too. And you started out doing labor organizing.
We started out doing neighborhood organizing, trying to save a hospital in New York City, St. Luke's Women's Hospital. We kept it open for 6 more years, but it eventually got moved down to Roosevelt. And obviously, if you live north of 96 or south of 96 is a big deal in Manhattan.
Right.
So moving it downtown, even if it was just a few miles, you may have moved it to Mars. So right. It was a fight to preserve neonatal intensive care services for the women of West Harlem. That's how I got started.
What do you think about tonight?
Right now, at this moment, fear the possibility that Trump wins.
Okay.
I don't think Hillary will pull off many surprise states. I could be wrong. I'd be happy to be wrong. Trump could pull off some surprise states. We have in our country unlikely voters in every racial group. We tend to talk about Black and Latino unlikely voters that have been a focus ever since the passage of the Voting Rights Act. But there's a much larger group of unlikely voters, which is lower income, less educated whites. 2 groups there that have played a notable role, and there's some overlap, in American elections in recent decades. One is those who simply just are disconnected from politics. And man, if you're a celebrity and you feel like you even resemble their values, but they connect with you on the big or small screen, they'll vote for you. I mean, that explains Jesse the Body Ventura, the Terminator, both becoming governor. It explains Gopher from the Love Boat becoming a congressman from Iowa. But the other, Fred Grandy, Cooter, was a progressive Dem on the Dukes of Hazzard, the tow truck driver. But the
Sonny Bono.
Right. My gosh. Let's not even go there. And so he always creeped me out as a kid when watching the Sonny and Cher show. But anyways, the other one, though, are extremist causes. If you remember Dinkins' somewhat surprise defeat by Giuliani, what was the special sort of like battery in that, equation, the source of superpower for Giuliani? The non-binding referendum on Staten Island that they secede from New York City. which brought out, like, I mean, you can imagine, right? You could run that today.
Oh my
God. Trump will get what I call cicada voters. Those come out more every 20 years than every 10. Once you vote less than once every 10 years, you're out of all the databases. So we don't track you. You won't get a call about polling. And there's, again, both groups, the ones who go for celebrity conservatives and the ones who go for extremist causes. He has made his campaign an extremist cause. And, of course, the KKK helped that by endorsing him.
So you're saying it's more likely than we think?
Oh, my God.
More possible than we think?
Yes, I think the only candidate that could have legions of voters who are not showing up in poll modeling is Trump. And if you want some evidence that could be the case, consider the weird conversation we've had about black early voters in the South over the last couple of weeks. First, it was, oh my God, the black vote is down. Like, wait. The numbers are up. The percentage is down. Why is the percentage down if the numbers are up? Because some other number has gone up faster, and that was the white vote down South. It could be all the white women coming out to vote for Hillary. Probably not.
Can you tell us a bit about Our Revolution and what you guys are doing and why you started what you started?
Yeah, look, we're focused on 2018 and 2020 and beyond. Not so much 2016, to be honest. I mean, our folks are out there. They're working. They've done. They've knocked on 100,000 doors. They've made 1 million calls. We've raised millions of dollars for progressive candidates. People like Peter Jacob over in New Jersey has an incredibly progressive candidate who might just upset a Republican, a very conservative, toxic Republican. This is a 31-year-old South Asian American immigrant social worker who has run a campaign that until 2 weeks ago had only raised $100,000 and pulled even in the polls with a Trump-supporting Republican who had raised $1 million. And so we've been helping to empower campaigns like that across the country. But what we're really looking at are the 15,000 Bernie supporters who said that they want to run for office in the next 4 years, and we want to support them. And we're looking at issues like right now, today in 3 states, you can vote to abolish the death penalty in California. We want to make sure that those pass. We want to push for public referenda, and we're preparing, federally for a battle with whoever becomes president tonight. Whoever becomes president, we're going to have to fight to pass the $15 minimum wage. We're going to have to fight to make sure that no more bad trade deals get passed.
You mean TPP?
Well, TPP and TPP light and TPP et cetera and TPP et al. And, you know what I'm saying? That's not the end of the bad alphabet. And, and we're going to have to fight to shift from war to peace. And there's going to be, so we're getting ready for that too. We've got a lot of Bernie activists who, through the movement, found a community.
I love the way you said we're going to have to fight with whoever is president.
Oh, yeah. It's like straight up. And they know that. And we've told them that. I mean, this is the thing, right? When I was trained as an organizer in Harlem, we were told straight up, first time I remember being involved in an election, like, don't get it twisted. We are not electing somebody to make change happen. We are electing somebody to make it easier for our movement to make change happen. We will never cede our power to a politician. We simply will pick the politician that we think will be the best dance partner.
Oh, yeah.
And the reality is, Hillary may only support 70% of what we believe in. But Donald Trump,
on a good day.
Yeah, okay. Maybe
let's say 60.
Let's say it's 60.
Well,
she's at 60. Donald Trump's at 6.
Right.
And yeah,
on a good day.
like where I'm from, 6 is an F and a 60 is a D. But man, there's a lot of space between 6 and 60. And if somebody shows up at 60, well, you can push them to 70. And you might shove them to 75. And that's what you do as a movement. I mean, my hero in New York City politics is a man who never became congressman because Congressman Powell, Adam Clayton Powell, beat him to the punch. The district up in Harlem, the Bronx, was created for A. Philip Randolph, the head of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, and Adam Clayton Powell was supposed to give the benediction at his coronation. And Adam Clayton Powell shows up to give the benediction. You speak first.
Oh, my gosh.
And he announced he was running for Congress.
I didn't know
that. Senior statesmen of black politics across the entire country that A. Philip Randolph was, he just said basically, if the young guy wants to do it, let him do it.
Wow.
But A. Philip Randolph was in conversations literally with FDR, JFK, and LBJ, where every time it would come down to the same thing, with the president say, look, I agree with you.
Go make me do it.
But make me do it.
Right.
And that's something that you bring up that's interesting because on my social media feed and the way that I hear a lot of people of my generation talking, it's this sort of like worship of the person in power, as though, like Obama, they're like, he's so cool, or like this idea that now we've elected somebody and they're going to save us. And and I've always had this idea that I don't respect the people in power like blindly. We're always in an adversarial relationship with the people who have access.
Yes.
And it's up to everyone to pull them as much as possible to get the resources and the attention.
Well, that's just it. But it's also like, what do you do for a friend who's in a very tough place, right? You support them. It means that you have their back. Why do you have their back? Because somebody else is shoving them from the front. And and when you see a politician who was a hero of yours fall down, it's typically because somebody was shoving them harder than from the front than you were holding them up from the back. And, that was a mistake that we made with Obama.
Big time.
Obama came in much more progressive than he will go out. And I know him, I think, better than most citizens, not as well as, say, Al Sharpton or some other folks. The president's heart's in the right place. But literally, we mistook him for Moses for a long time. We were celebrating the streets. The conservatives were planning in the suites. The conservatives in this country, in very many ways, rooted in the South and the old Confederacy. And what the old Confederacy and their descendants have been very good at is losing wars and winning the peace. So we win the war that is a presidential election, and they win the peace that is the legislative space in between. And we have to get much better at both winning the war and the peace.
And so I have two questions. One is, how much is Obama's transformation just a function of being the president? The left was asleep at the wheel, I would say, for a lot of his presidency, but how inevitable is some kind of transformation towards the right? And also, why is he so hell-bent on TPP?
The hell-bent on TPP, I don't want to conjecture about because it just takes me to a bad place.
Right. Is it? But it's somewhere.
And I truly don't know why. Okay. What I would say is, regardless, we have to fight it.
Sure.
That there's really not a good reason. I think it may be. The best you could say is that he may be more oriented to the new economy of the Silicon Valley rather than the old economies of like Ohio. And in the Silicon Valley, most people are pro TPP because it facilitates their domination of Asia through technology. In Ohio, people say, wait a second, we feed our families off the auto parts industry here. It's not just whether you work at the factory, it's whether you work at the restaurant that the factory workers eat at. It's that whole ecology. And the TPP will send the American auto parts industry the way of the American textile industry, which has all but disappeared.
The way of the dodo.
Yeah.
But yeah, I ran into you at the DNC in Philadelphia and was so excited to have you on because as a big nerd who watched, as you know, the Democratic Platform committee meetings, I think you boiled it down perfectly, the difference between progressive Democrats and DNC Democrats. So, and what is it like for you? You were a Sanders surrogate and you understandably made the argument about why was a better candidate than Hillary Clinton, would be a better nominee than she is. So what's it like to then transition? And I don't see it as a contradiction. I think
I'm doing what Bernie did.
Yeah. So what is it like though?
There hasn't been a whole lot of love from the Clinton campaign. It's not like
Neera Tanden.
Yeah, Neera's an old friend with a who's a bit catty. But and she was disappointed. She was grieving having a good friend of her go the other way. Right. I forgive Neera. Lord knows I've said worse things.
Right. That's we're referring to the WikiLeaks.
Did she text you a eulogy?
No, she actually, you know what? I will give her this. And this is, I think, an important lesson for all of us. I found out about the WikiLeaks from Neera. She called me before anybody else did and apologized. There's a lot of folks who were hid under the covers for a week, bumped into you sheepishly at Starbucks and I'm sorry. No, but she was forthright about it. That's fine. Politics, is I come from the school that politics is war without bloodshed. And people in war do really nasty things. I grew up in a place where, sticks and stones will break my bones was our mantra. Like words, I'm not worried about. But what I am worried about is progressives who mistake this, mistake politicians for saviors, mistake elections for either popularity contests or purity tests. Politics is muddy. The only way that we make progress is if we're smart and we fight and we get right down on the field with everybody else. We have an opportunity as progressives to transform this country radically. The biggest opportunities are probably in the South where things look most dire. But the reality is that right now progressives have, on paper, majorities in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, and Florida, the entire southern eastern seaboard. In Maryland, we're playing with it. People are registered. We have other internal things to sort out. And South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, what gets you to the starting line is massive voter registration drives. And that's, I think, one of the places that we have to go. And I'll just give you an example. The politics of the Black community are fairly progressive. There are a lot of traditions and, relationships that can make them kind of harder to mobilize, as we saw in the Bernie campaign, or pivot quickly. But the politics are there.
Did you see the movie The New Black?
No.
About the same-sex marriage in Baltimore?
No, but it's...
Yeah, well, I'll tell you about it after.
Yeah, I would love to see it because I was one of the architects of that campaign.
Oh, wow.
So I would love to see it.
Richmond made it.
Okay, yeah. No, I can tell you that story. But
oh, great.
Well, let's just talk about this story for a second.
Okay.
It's a good thing. So it was Chad Griffin's first day at the Human Rights Campaign. And that year we had marriage equality on the ballot in 4 states. And I had come in the NAACP just a few weeks before the Prop 8 vote in California, for which the Black community was shamelessly scapegoated because the margin Prop 8, that the wrong side won by, was larger than the entire percentage of the Black vote in California. So you could, and obviously not 100% of us vote for anything. So you couldn't explain it with us. But they tried to do that. Even the New York Times. I literally had to have a New York Times reporter 2 years later take out a calculator to explain to her why she needed to get off this old. I mean, it was like, really? It's like, you work for the... Lordy.
Yeah.
National Enquirer, I'd expect this.
Right.
New York Times, I expect you to be able to add. But the leaders of the marriage equality movement, who deserve endless credit for their foresight and their courage, had given up on Maryland because it has such a large Black population and because we were polling at like 51% for marriage equality. And what they said was, look, the far right wing will come in the last 2 weeks, funded by the Catholic Church, the Mormon Church, etc., and they will run these negative ads and they'll push down support 9 points. So it's not worth investing if we're only up by 1 point. But I was looking at a trend line where support was gaining very, very quickly. And so Chad Griffin's first day at HRC asked to meet with me, the president of the NAACP. So I came over to D.C. and we had a great, wonderful conversation about all the things we would do and transgender equality and all of the places we would work. And I just said to Chad, I said, well, what about Maryland? He's like, well, what do you think? I said, well, I think it's wide open territory, man. I said, everybody else has picked, Washington State. I think it was Minnesota, Maine. I said, but everybody's bugging out of Maryland. And I live there, brother, and we can win it. And he said, well, let's go do it. So I hired a couple of organizers. One of them is a young leader in Baltimore named Fagin Harris. He was at the time was a Rhodes Scholar, a working class kid from Baltimore, had gone over to Oxford. He stayed home for a trimester, was our lead organizer. The Prince George County NAACP, the NAACP in Baltimore and other places were out in full effect. And we won. We became the first state south of the Mason-Dixon to, on the ballot, win marriage equality. We also, though, developed arguments that to this day boost marriage equality's support in the Black community by 10 points. So if right now I'm proud to say, like in states like Georgia, if you poll marriage equality, it polls at like 51% in the Black community. But if you say, do you support marriage equality and you basically restate the protections of the First Amendment for all churches, it jumps to like 62%. And so that's how we actually wrote the law on the ballot in Maryland, was so that we just simply regurgitated the First Amendment. It wasn't, saying anything people shouldn't already know, but just that little extra assurance that your, church, your religion, your synagogue, your temple is still allowed to follow its own, culture. It jumps 10 points.
Wow. Or its interpretation of its own culture, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, it's, anyways. But it's, and that's, so it's great. So now literally the Black community has super majorities in support of marriage equality, even in the Deep South.
Wow. I think the first time I heard about you was when I saw you on TV, I think on Democracy Now! when Troy Davis.
Yeah, I worked that case for 15 years.
So Troy Davis was ultimately killed. You can do a better job.
Yeah, Troy was murdered. Troy was on death row in Georgia for 15, 16 years, maybe actually a little longer. He had been convicted of killing Officer McPhail in Savannah, I believe, in the early mid-1990s. And he was convicted by 7 eyewitnesses. I met his sister a year or two after he was convicted at an anti-death penalty conference with her son, who was wearing underoos. He was wearing Captain America underoos. And she came out to me that day and she said, my brother's innocent. And, there were a dozen other families at the conference saying, our brother's innocent. So, by that point of the day, I said to her what I said to every other family, which is, look, bring us the evidence and we'll fight like hell. 15 years later, 14 maybe years later, I was president of the NAACP. I get a call from the president of the Georgia NAACP saying, we have a young man on death row here I'm convinced is innocent. I want you to get down here and meet with him. I go in there and meet with Troy Davis, and I'm moved by his clarity, his conviction. I've been told that a number of the eyewitnesses had recanted. We prayed together. He was eloquent. Prison guards were crying or wiping tears because they were convinced of his innocence too. And I walk out, and there's a woman standing next to her 18-year-old son by a car, and she calls him, Mr. Jealous? I said, yeah, I'll walk over. And she said, hi, I'm Troy's sister, Martina, and this is my son. And she hands me a photograph of me standing next to a little boy in underoos. And she says, do you remember this day? I said, I do. She said, do you remember the promise you made to me? I said, I'm sure I said, bring me the evidence and I'll fight like hell. She said, here's the evidence. And she opened her trunk. And he was convicted by 9 eyewitnesses. 7 of the 9 had recanted. All that was there. There were 2 left. One was the primary alternative suspect, a guy who literally has a rap sheet like as long as this room. The other was somebody who said that on a moonless night, 100 or more yards away, under a tree, they could recognize a dark-skinned Black person beyond a shadow of a doubt.
And the guy who didn't recant, the primary suspect, he was the first one to suggest it was Troy
Davis,
yes. Right?
No, it's really, he's the guy who did it. And in fact, his own nephew will tell you his story of 2 nephews. Troy Davis's nephew is really more like his son. He visited him every week of his life on death row until his mom got so sick. This is Martina from the
MS?
ravages of chemotherapy that they could only go every 2 weeks. And then, Red, whatever his last name is, the primary alternative suspect, his nephew said, nope, I heard my uncle say that he did it. And so, we fought like hell. And at a certain point, I was back at that prison. I was confronting the warden. And the warden had been switched. The previous warden thought that Troy was innocent and that the execution could be halted. And so the governor switched that warden out and put in a warden who was committed to kill him under any, basically was shot himself. And I was trying to get 60 Minutes in there. And the warden said, I'm not letting them in. I said, why? He said, because there's too much doubt. I said, well, there's too much doubt for a reason, warden. So I'm watching every time I come here, at least one of your prison guards starts crying in the middle of my conversations with Troy. It's like you're about to ask these people to hold the left leg, the right leg, the left arm, the right arm, the head, while they administer, poison to execute a man that they believe is innocent. I said, we have an alternative. He said, well, what's that? I said, we could let the truth out, get the wrong man out, get the right guy in here. And I said, by the way, I won't be leading any more protests outside your prison because, there's 4,000 other people on death row who will be much more compelling cases, many of them, than a guy who actually did it. And
right.
And he said, I don't think you understand one thing. I said, what's that? He said, I was on law enforcement in Savannah the night that Officer McPhail was killed. Troy Davis will hang for this. And so that case, we then went back and we said, this is why it's important for activists to understand history. if you talk, we were talking earlier about kind of family histories in the movement. If you talk to, say, black folks on the far left or lifelong activists and white folks on the far left who say in their 70s and 80s, what really moved them, what case really moved them in the early 1950s? Black folks is always like, it's like Brown versus Board. But with, if you're talking about the death penalty, criminal justice, you say what moved them. White activists eventually will get a little around to the case of a guy named Carl Chessman. Carl Chessman used books and traditional media to build global support for his innocence from death row. He's why we now have these laws that kind of limit your ability to publish and stuff from death, from prison. One of the reasons. And literally, like in Pasadena, California, the junior high school was told by somebody who was a junior high school student then, on the moment of his execution, had a moment of silence that lasted for how long they thought the execution would take. And all the young people stopped because they were all reading Life magazine. They were reading his books. So he was, in many ways, like JFK, the first of his kind, in this case, first clemency case, opposed to first candidacy, to master the use of traditional media, television, magazines. Well, in the era of social media, we just come out of the Barack Obama campaign. We're going to the Troy Davis campaign. We said, we don't have time for that. And they won't even let us 60 minutes in. So we have to make Troy Davis's clemency campaign the most effective use of social media of any clemency campaign we've ever seen. And NAACP and Amnesty, collectively, our communications departments, created the hashtag #TooMuchDoubt. That hashtag was the most tweeted social issue, the second most tweeted hashtag in the world in 2011. And this is why I'll always believe in the power of Twitter at the end of the day to raise consciousness. Now you may say, well, what got more tweeted? Hashtag Beyonce is pregnant. But
but that's a high bar. So
yeah, it's a high bar. It's a really high bar, right? And so here's the interesting thing, guys. When Troy was executed, Gallup sends a poll into the field. Comes back, says that public support for the death penalty has fallen to the lowest point since when it was momentarily, admittedly, abolished in 1972. And they actually credit, among like three factors, the impact of the #TooMuchDoubt Twitter campaign to raise people's consciousness, make them realize that Kim Kardashian is concerned, and the former head of the FBI under George W. Bush is concerned, and
Bob Barr, is it Bill Barr?
Bob Barr, was concerned. Mike Huckabee helped with that campaign, made calls to the governor. And I don't think I've ever said that publicly before, but there were a lot of folks who were. And so what that meant was we were able to go into Maryland, again, first state south of the Mason-Dixon, and abolish the death penalty that year. We were able to go to Connecticut, where a socialite had been murdered in a horrific killing, and typically that means you can't discuss the death penalty, and abolish the death penalty that year. And so, that's the way, but you have to, for our young activists, you've got to take your power on Twitter and add it up to an actual strategy on the ground to push legislation, to push candidates. It can't just be about consciousness raising, but you also can't succeed without consciousness raising. You connect the two and you change the world quickly.
Mm. So you need a good slogan and you need spreadsheets.
Yes, and you need a strategy.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I couldn't.
So there, the 3 S's: slogan, spreadsheet, strategy.
We're patenting that. Yeah, you heard it here first, guys. Well, yeah, that was. Was it hard for you? I know you have to run, but just how were you able to get out of bed after he was executed?
Look, on his anniversary, I still have trouble getting out of bed. Part of it was that on death row, Troy told me that I was now responsible for his nephew. Oh. And his nephew lost his grandmother who had helped raise him 6 months before Troy's execution, his mother 2 months after Troy's execution, and his aunts have their hands full. And so he lost the 3 adults who were most focused on raising him, and all that was between his junior and senior year of high school. I got a big award that year from the Puffin Foundation through The Nation magazine. I gave basically half of it to his education at Morehouse College, and I'm very involved with him every week, helping him get through Morehouse and get on to his career. And, that's why we get out of bed, right? Is we have young people whose lives we're responsible for, sometimes specifically, sometimes collectively, and you fight for them.
Wow. Yeah, that's like extremely personal, right? And kind of a visceral thing, but also with the hashtag being successful, even though he was murdered, that's another thing, right?
Troy gave us our mandate. I remembered the day I sat at a table like this, simple table, the death row, and I went through Troy. This is everything we're going to do to try to save your life. And he said, Ben, that's great. Please try to save my life. He said, understand this is Georgia. No matter what you do, it may not work. He said, but no matter what you do, what you must guarantee me is that you will fight to destroy the machinery of death until it's dismantled. And he said, and in order to do that, I just asked you to do one thing. I said, what's that? He said, make sure they know my name. Make sure they understand what's happening to me so they can't do this to anyone else. And that's what really drove us to be so focused on a social media campaign when we were all terrified that our friend was about to be murdered.
Right. Yeah. And I remember there was that one, someone said for a second, like there was a rumor that just spread through the crowd, I think, that he got a stay.
Because he had had so many stays before, and the Supreme Court was vacillating. And here's the thing, in all of our kind of quick-to-point figures, very few people have actually put together the dots and said, actually, it was 3 black men from Georgia, including 2 from Savannah, that ultimately killed Troy Davis. It was the black DA in Savannah who had been elected with the support of the civil rights community who was too cowardly to reopen the investigation. It was the black chairman of the Board of Pardons of Paroles who flipped his vote. He was voted to stay for Troy before he flipped it. Why? Because he had said to us, look, you can't get a majority unless you can get one of the white members. And then we delivered one of the white members. And then he flipped and voted against us. And then it was Clarence Thomas, who grew up in Savannah, Georgia, and who actually said, let me take the case, and thought about it for an hour. I was like, kill him. And so that was one of the things, I think, as a black leader of an organization that's rooted in the black community, that was so just deflating.
Because they had too much skin in the game? What was you look at that.
I don't know. I can never explain Clarence Thomas to my own satisfaction. Because Clarence Thomas was being Clarence Thomas.
Yeah. Because
the general who was the black general, was the chair of the Board of Pardons Paroles, was an effing coward. And because the DA was scared because of his own political difficulties. None of them had the gratitude ultimately for people like Troy Davis's mother, who had been a frontline civil rights activist in the 50s and 60s in Savannah, and whose courage, along with millions of other people, had benefited all of them directly. And that's the tragic truth. But again, young people combining consciousness raising slogans, as you would say, with strategy, transformed, really the whole debate on the death penalty, because now six more states and we'll be in the Supreme Court abolishing it in the entire country.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's great. I have so many more questions for you.
Well, I'll come back.
Yeah, definitely come back.
I'll come back.
When you're
this
in New
is
York
fun.
Next. Yeah,
you can bring the 2 of us to like a bar mitzvah, and we can have everybody try to figure out.
Oh yeah, the ethnic
which
charades.
Jewish family we're a part of.
Yeah. Right. Because I like sometimes people will think I'm Latin and he's Jewish. And
no, all of us. We can just go like an eating tour of New York City. And they'll just assume like wherever we are. If we're in like Jackson Heights, we'll be Colombian.
Right. yeah, totally. Yeah.
And by the way, if you're thinking about getting a Master's of Public Administration or Master's of Public Policy at Princeton University, the Woodrow Wilson School, it's free.
What?
Yeah, it's totally free.
Gabe, let's go.
I'm telling you, room and board, stipend. Like literally, they like buy your beer every week. Can you imagine? It's totally free.
Can you imagine Katie and Gabe go to the Woodrow Wilson School? It's like an
Getting
80s
that
movie.
Masters. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean it's right. and the MPP is 1 year. It's totally paid for. So
we're doing it. We're doing it.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you what. If you come do it, I'll do your show every week.
Oh my God! Now we got to do it. All right, you guys. This is the birth of the beginning of a beautiful academic and cultural radio media relationship. So
there you go.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Appreciate you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.